funny thing is that the listening pattern of an actual listener is they only listen to 10% of what we have to say. So if we talk for a minute, they're only listening for like maybe the first half, maybe the middle, or maybe the end. Repeating bits isn't that big of a deal because you're not going to catch the same person every time, all the time. But I'm glad you brought that up because I am conscious about what I say and I try not to repeat the same story. Like I could tell the same story every time Sam Roberts comes about me getting kicked out of his concert, but like I've already told that for since 2008. You know what I mean? Because that's when it happened. But not everybody has heard that story because there's new listeners every day. So it's a balance of trying to remember that. But the internet is a fascinating place, which makes it very easy for me not to repeat stuff over and over again. And I guess it's just going out there and living, right? Like going out and which was very hard during the pandemic, but yeah, going out and telling stories and repeating stories or just talking about the things that I do, talking about my dog, talking about that kind of stuff. The liberty that we have and what we can talk about at the station is also fantastic. So if we were limited to only being able to talk about like 5 things, you would hear the same kind of stuff all the time. But we're open to talk about whatever we want in moderation, obviously. So yeah, that makes it a lot easier not to repeat. Plus the fact that bands are always doing something, you can always spin stuff a certain way. I think being in this industry, you have somewhat of creativity in you a little bit, so you can find creative ways to do things. And because we are such a tight team, it's easy to bounce ideas off of other people, like the other jocks, like bounce stuff off Andrew and Amal and Dave on the morning, or I'll bounce stuff off Jen, or Noah will give us stuff. So a lot of us share a lot of that. We share a lot of stuff and help each other out a lot. And we've all been working together, minus Amal, for 17 years, right? Amal came in a little bit later, but Amal's still been there, I think, 15 or 14 years or something. So we've all become like a pretty big family, or a small family, I should say. So bouncing ideas off each other is what makes it easy.
Is there an actual list of things you're not allowed to talk about? So you would assume, you can't say things that are sexist or racist or whatever, but is there an actual list? Like when you go to a gym, it's like no phone in the change room, no whatever.
Right.
Is there a list that all the radio DJs have looked at that says there's 8 things that you just do not touch? Does that exist?
You know what? It might exist somewhere. It could possibly exist somewhere. With us, it doesn't exist. We don't have one of those lists. There's obviously common sense things, and I know common sense, once we learn how to bottle it and sell it, whoever learns how to do that is going to be a fucking millionaire. But until that time, we assume that you have the common sense. So there's also we went from, we as being, Live was owned by New Cap, which was a small company, but still had owned a lot of stations across the country. Like I think we were 90 some stations or whatever. So we ended up getting bought out by Stingray. So now Stingray has their own radio wing, which is us. They have a lot of TV and karaoke is where they made their money. So, all that. But so there are times when you have to toe the corporate line, so to speak. And that is just because there are certain things, and I get that, there are certain things that we want, and what we say is always going to be representative of the station, right? Now, of course, if you feel seriously about something and you want to take that stand, they definitely aren't going to push you off of it. But I've always found that my thought process anyway, and my thinking, is that I never wanted to use radio as a soapbox. I never wanted to get up there and preach. That's not what I got into it to do. To me, radio is really inclusive and fun. And now there are things that upset me, and you'll definitely know, but my delivery will be much more sarcastic. And if you understand my sarcasm, then you already think the same way as me. So you're cool, If you don't get it and you think I'm being offensive, well, there's probably nothing that we should be talking about anyway because it just went right over your head, so you don't get it. Um, Not to be a dick or anything, but I try definitely to keep it on the, like, I'm not trying to say that I'm definitely not silenced in any way, but there definitely isn't a list of things like you come in like, oh, can't talk about that today. It's on the list. Like, oh shit, can't say that. You don't swear. Um, you're not going to be a racist because racists are dicks, so, and none of us are, right? Um, it was hard during the occupation to not really voice like my actual real shit, you know what I mean? Which was hard, but I bit my tongue, you know what I mean? Because then I guess it would become preachy, and that it was just so dividing, right? It was so dividing. This whole pandemic has been dividing, but so yeah, there's no list. I'd love to see if there was a list though, because I would wonder what the list would say. Besides, I feel like there would be like, don't swear, don't be a racist, and then like use common sense. And then maybe subtitles under the common sense being like, if you don't have common sense, this is what we mean, but I'm not sure. That's how I envision this list.
And if the Ottawa Senators don't make the playoffs, don't mention it on the radio, like little things like that.
Yeah, like be carefully cheering for the Leafs on the radio. Are you a Habs fan? Now, mind you, the rock radio and sports radio and news, we all are in radio, but it's a completely different like ballpark, you know what I mean? Right? So, and I love sports and I would love to be a sportscaster, I think that would be fantastic. Like as a kid, I always looked up to that stuff, but that's because we played so much sports and I played so much ring ed and was on the ice with my dad, doing hockey camps and stuff. So I just never thought I could be on the other side of the camera. I never thought I would be that appealing to be on the other side of the camera. My brother actually made me a t-shirt that said I have a face for radio. So, so I take the radio sports thing. That would be an amazing thing, but it's a lot of work in sports radio. So.
Do you ever have days where the last thing you want is to talk on the radio?
Oh, 100%. Oh my God. 100%. But
every day.
Yeah. Every day, Joelle. Okay. No, as my boss is listening. Oh God, no. Yeah. There are definitely days when I don't want to play radio at all. And it's so funny because I get those days and I'm like, I have nothing to talk about. I have nothing to say. You're scraping the bottom of your brain. And then you sit in that chair and you get your stuff together and you literally just like, it just all comes. And even if it's not a lot, right? Like worst case scenario, you can always talk about the music. Always. There's always a story behind the music. There's always a story behind the artist. There's always something, whether you dig back deep or something current or some part of like, like this band used to be called this or before they switched it to this. You know what I mean? And that's all. That's all you need. Our listeners come to us because they love our music. We fill in the blanks. I'm not doing a talk show. I'm not trying to I'm not doing a podcast like yours, right? Where you're filling like 2 hours of time. I talk 3 times an hour for a minute, right? So as I sit there and be a big baby some days where I don't want to do it, I got 3 minutes out of a whole hour where I got to fill. I think I can fucking suck it up, especially sitting in a job that a lot of people would love to have. Like I'll never take radio for granted ever. And I also will never ever feel like I'm good, or like I'm like, oh, I'm perfect. I've reached the maximum that I can reach. Doc told me that from Doc and Woody. Doc said, I said, when do you actually feel like you're good? Like when do you get this way? And he's like, if you ever get that way, you might need to check yourself because you never get that way, and that's what makes you better because you're always striving to get better, and you want to improve. You want to say less ums. You want to have tighter breaks. You want to hit your posts. You want to be out. Like I love being out in the community. I love doing volunteer work through the station. Like we have 5 hours of work, but I have commitments on weekends. I have promotional stuff I have to do. And I love that stuff. I love doing, we do a lot of stuff with Canoe for Kids. We do a lot of stuff with Dragon Boat. We do great stuff with Hope. We're a major sponsor with Hope Volleyball Summerfest. So that whole weekend, I got to go and get on stage, play volleyball, and be backstage with bands. Oh, shitty,
Tough break.
Yeah, yeah. Like, oh, it sucks, man. So I never once complain. And really, if I am not in the mood to be on the air, it's mostly because I put myself in that state, and that's usually my own fault. So I can't blame anybody else. So yeah, but it happens.
So when I let my parents know that I was going to have you on as a guest, they sent me a list of like 20 questions to ask. So I picked one question for each of them. So from my dad, Dennis Martin, what do you like most about your job and how does a person stay sharp every day when on the air? So that's from my dad. And then from my
Okay.
mom, what was your worst day on radio, whether it was technical problems or a horrible caller that calls in and you're stuck with them on the air? So those are the two questions. So what do you love most and how do you stay sharp? And then what was the worst day?
Okay. Well, I think so. I think my worst day, honestly, I'm trying to think if I had bad days at live. I'm sure I have. But I think my worst day was when I went on the air on Shay and you couldn't hear the other person. Honestly, I still have dreams about that still. And maybe hitting Eric the instrument in the nuts. I do feel bad about that because like the poor guy almost lost his nut. And my mom always told me to never hit a boy in the nuts unless you really needed to because them's important to them. So I was like, oh my God. So I think that might have been the worst. There was a lot of hard days, I will say, as a bonus side to that in the beginning of live, because there was so many technical issues that we were going through as a new station. And a lot of the work was getting done during the evening. So I always had my engineer there with me, fixing stuff or going over things or, yeah, dead air here or, whatever. So, and I think the thing I love most about my job or about being on the radio is how we connect with people and you don't really know how much you connect with people. Yeah, you don't really know, like picking up the phone, and I have to remember this too, because sometimes I can be really bitchy on the phone. My sarcasm sometimes doesn't come across as it would if I was in real life, right? Because you can see me, I can make a face, whatever, I can laugh. But like sometimes I come off because I have a really hard time with dumb, and sometimes people make dumb comments and I just can't handle it. I'm like, what's happening? But I have to remember that listeners that, yeah. So anyway, I have to remember this. I'm working on it. But I think the way that we connect with people is really, really humbling. And I think I don't think that is honestly my favorite thing. My favorite thing. When I moved to Halifax, I made an announcement on the air. And this was after 8 years that I'd been with Live. And I made an announcement on the air. I'm an emotional person, as you know from the testimonials you got from my brother and Andrew. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm pretty emotional. I seem really tough, but it's a total fake. I could have been an actress, I think. And I got emotional on the air because I was saying goodbye, and it was hard, and it was scary, and I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. I had over 500 comments from listeners. What? That's crazy. But the comments were all the same. Like, who am I going to drive home with that night? Going up to the garage is never going to be the same because I'm not going to be able to listen to you. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's crazy. It's crazy to think that. It's even hard for me now to imagine the 3 people who listen to me, or whatever it is, right? It could be 3, it could be 300,000. Who knows how many people listen to me? But that connection that you make could really make or break someone's day just by chatting, telling ridiculous stories about your white owls or your brother, Like I did have an embarrassing story about my brother though too, which I am going to tell because I tell it all the time. That I did to him. But so I think that would be it. And staying sharp, we've already talked about it. Caffeine's the best. Caffeine and the internet when it's doing good things and not terrible things.
So celebrities say it's hard to connect. How to phrase this? So celebrities say sometimes it's hard to connect with fans because the fans feel like they really know you and you're just meeting them for the first time. So you're not on the same page, you know? So you've seen an actor in 10 movies and so that's 20 hours of a journey you've been with them. And then they're meeting this stranger and you tell them you love them, you tell them you're a fan. They know all this stuff about you, you know nothing about them. So sometimes that's difficult. And with you on the radio, if they've been listening to you for 17 years, they feel like you're a best friend, you know, a family member. And it's hard, the expectations when they show up and they meet you and you're starting at 0 and they're at 100.
And you know what? The majority of our listeners are like that because they know everything about us. Like, people I know will tell me that they know exactly how the inside of my house is laid out, which I've never gone to that extent to let you know how my house is. But that's kind of like the idea, right? And it's true. But also because we've been doing this for so long, and because Live has done a lot of community things, you know, we had the Live Lounge, which we were there all the time, live music, live shows. We were there just as guests, you know what I mean? Like enjoying the live music and stuff. You get to meet some of these listeners in person. So we have actually been fortunate enough to establish an actual friendship with these people, right? So they do know things about us, but that's only a handful of them. That's not all of them, right? So I'll meet, if I'm at 1 out of 10, I might know a little bit more about you than me. So I'm starting a little bit ahead. Like you said, instead of starting at 0, I might be starting at like 10 or 15, but they still know everything about me. So it is hard, but that's why. And I also find it, you know, for some people, calling the radio station is a thing. Like it's just a normal thing. Whereas I never called radio stations. Like I was in one radio station contest for XFM, and I only did it because my best friend wanted tickets to go to a show, and she couldn't run fast, and I could run fast. That's the only reason why. But like wouldn't call, I wouldn't make requests, I wouldn't do anything. But there are people who obviously enjoy doing that, right? So what doesn't float for me doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't float for you. So you have to remember that. You do have to remember that. And that sarcasm does not translate over the phone as well as you'd like it to. So I apologize to anybody who I've done that to who's listening.
You've done lots of interviews over the years with different artists, different bands. Who have you interviewed that you were the biggest fan of before interviewing them? And then what is the worst interview you've done or the worst call-in that happened?
Oh, okay. So I have two. So I had one. So I got to interview Chris Cornell.
Wow.
So I interviewed Chris Cornell. Remember when he put out that solo album? And it was
more dancey with Timbaland?
Thank you. Yes. Okay. So I was told I was going to be able to interview him, and it was around that time. So the night before, I had done so much research, like so much, from like, I'm talking like we're going FBI like you did, but like all the way back to like Mother Love Bone, you know, like we're going far, far back, Seattle shit. And then I wanted to like intertwine back and like, you know, Temple the Dog and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I get on the phone the next day and it's their manager, like, hi, Chelsea. Hi, yeah. Okay, here's Mr. Cornell. Okay. You'll have about 15 minutes. Go ahead. Hands the phone. I'm like, hi, Chris, how are you? Hi, Chelsea, how are you? And his voice is just perfect, you know? And you're like, oh my God, I'm talking to Chris Cornell right now. I think I asked him 3 questions and he talked the whole time. The whole time. He just talked. And like, I couldn't even tell you what the questions were, but it was not even a fraction of what I wanted to talk about. Like not even one thing. Like I didn't get to Mother Love Bone. I really only just talked about like the teaming up with Timbaland, I think. And then, I wanted him to talk about Billie Jean, his cover of Billie Jean. I remember I wanted to talk about that too. Like that was it. So the fact that I got to talk to Chris Cornell is a huge, huge thing. Then I interviewed the guys from Bad Religion. And I'm a big fan of Bad Religion. I couldn't believe I was actually talking to this like punk royalty, right? And I couldn't get my words out. I couldn't think. I was just so nervous that they actually stopped me and told me to breathe. They're like, honey, it's fine. Just take a breath. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. So yeah, those are two big ones. I got to interview Laura Jane Grace when before she transitioned, and huge fan of Against Me, like huge fan. And I was so misprepared. I'd like disappointed myself about how unprepared I was because she was touring at the time for her White Crosses album, massive album. It was huge, great album. I love it. I listen to it all the time. And I just like asked about Poutine, like how the tour was going. Have you had a Poutine? Like nothing, like just so unprepared and made myself look so unprofessional. Like it was just so now if I ever get to interview her again, I want to bring that up, apologize for my unprofessionalism, and then do like a kick-ass interview. So, but I have a couple of those, like Brody Dahl. She was way too hungover. I was on her bus. She didn't want to do it. And then after the show, she was drunk again. And there's a picture of me straddling her. And she had a huge belt buckle on, like a massive belt. Remember, like we used to wear those big belt buckles? And I was around her, like I was on her and I was around her and I got stuck on her belt. And I like couldn't get off. I was like, oh God, I'm stuck. Oh God. In my like nether region. So that was entertaining. But all the rest of them have gone pretty well, I would say. I would think. I didn't get my hoo-hoo stuck on anybody else's belt. So there's that. But I would interview her again though too. She put on a great show.